I'm Chris Beachum, managing editor of Gold Derby, here with Seth Meyers from Late Night. Seth, this past year, obviously a tough one for everybody on many, many different levels, but from a talk show level, we talked about this a little bit last summer because you were 2 or 3 months into this process, but is there anything you've learned over this past year that you might take forward into shows as you do new shows this summer and in the fall?
Well, I think the thing we discovered the most this year by doing the show, not just out of the studio, but back in the studio without an audience, is how you're doing the show for people who are at home, far more than you ever were doing it for the people in the studio. Now, don't get me wrong, it was really exciting to have 200 people there watching your show, and you tried very hard to make sure they had a good time and you wanted them to laugh and enjoy themselves. But, the relationship any talk show host has is with the people who are watching it at home. And I think doing it at home and looking into an iPad lens with the knowledge that people at home were watching it probably on some version of an iPad, increased that connection with the audience. And I hope that we don't lose the connection we've built up over this past year.
The reason I ask that is I know people in other lines of work that their bosses have realized that maybe they could work from home some during the week and then commute in on other days, and they get a lot more productivity out of the person because they're not traveling, say, 2 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, our writers were always really good at being productive both in and out of the office. I've been blown away by how the level has not dropped at all, despite the fact that they haven't been able to, percolate with one another. With that said, I think that they're all probably desperate to come back just for the camaraderie of a place like this. It is a really fun environment, and I've missed that a great deal. But insofar as how efficient they've been, we're never going to ask people to rush back if they found a way to balance their work and life better having been at home.
I watch all of the late night shows. I record them all and then generally watch them the next day or a couple of days later.
That's healthy. That's healthy.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think you, of all of them, adapted as well as anybody and did as good a show as anybody did this past year. How did you feel about it, especially once you got the rhythms of it and figured out what you wanted to do, what you didn't want to do?
It was for a year that had so little good to it. It was creatively exhilarating figuring out how to do this show. And it was technically challenging to figure out how to do it in our 2 remote locations. And then when we got to come back into the studio, the job became so much easier in that we were surrounded by professionals again. And so there was all this space for us to just focus on the creative of the show. And we have really enjoyed the extra space that we have, one, from not having an audience in the studio, so we can kind of explore the things that we find funniest and we hope that people who are watching at home find funniest. And 2, in these post-Trump presidency months, there is, as we had long expected, more real estate to do stuff that is maybe a little bit, more whimsical, a little bit less deathly serious. And it's been a great relief to us and hopefully to everybody else as well.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I saw your In My Day segment last night, which was a lot of fun. Maybe you don't do that, if it's a heavy election cycle or terrible things are going on, but you can kind of let loose. We had Kenan Thompson on last week, and he said they felt once the election was over and they got into, February, March, April, May, they could just do goofier stuff.
Yeah, I think that there's, people sometimes tune into shows like ours to see what we're going to say about this. Oh my God, something happens in the news that's major, and you say, oh my God, what are they going to say about this? And I think now there's this really fun thing happening where people are just tuning in to hear what we have to say. I think there's an expectation that it might be about the news, but there's also a sense that our show now is less. I think a lot of shows were a lot about Donald Trump, and now they're less about Donald Trump and more about just the show themselves. And that is a great freedom.
I went on the NBC website, the Emmy website, to look to see what episodes, what segments you were spotlighting, and talk about serious. 2 of the 6 I think you have on there were the insurrection day and the day after. What are those conversations like in the office, on the phone, on Zoom, to figure out how you're going to discuss that and handle that on a late night show that's mostly about laughs, but you've got to cover the subjects of the day?
I hope my memory serves, but on Insurrection Day, I'm pretty sure we ended up doing the show live just because it was all happening so fast that we were acutely aware that we could do something at 2, 3 in the afternoon that would tonally be so off the mark based on what was happening in real time on the TVs in the background of our office. So, you know, it was a day that got away from everybody that you couldn't have planned for, and we were just lucky. And I think it was a weird benefit of having lived through these last 4 years where you have to be really agile insofar as what you write about, but also, we learned how to move really quickly over the course of the pandemic, and I think that helped us a lot that day as well.
The other episodes I was watching, I'd seen them before, but I wanted to remind myself, were lots of funny people. Keenan, Michael Keaton, Bill Hader, Amy Poehler. When you have somebody is coming on that night that can knock it out of the park, how is that feeling different for you as a host as opposed to somebody maybe you haven't interviewed before that's more serious?
In general, I feel like the work is over once we start interviewing guests. That has never struck me as the hard part of a show like this. It got a little bit harder figuring out the rhythms of talking to people over Zoom, but we've now reached the point where, unfortunately, we've gotten a lot of reps doing that as well. So I think we've figured more or less a good way to do that night in and night out. The fun part about people is you just don't worry about talking over them. I think so much of being a host is being polite and making people feel at home. And so, especially with what might be a slightly slow connection speed or a little bit of lag on the audio, I'm so deeply concerned that I will interrupt somebody mid-story. Whereas if it's somebody like Michael Keaton or Bill Hader or Keenan, people I know, I think they're going to understand that I'm just trying to help if I jump in and not take it the wrong way. By the way, I should note that I'm projecting. No one has ever said I'm being rude. It's just my deep-seated fear that I will be perceived that way.
Is there a perfect talk show guest? Is there somebody, or I'll give you, while you think about that, I think in my lifetime, my 3 favorite talk show guests, whether it was Johnny or Dave or anybody's show, were, in terms of just being funny, were Mel Brooks, Robin Williams, and Martin Short. I just think those 3, you can't go wrong with any of those 3. And you, as a host, you don't know where anything is going to go when they're on.
No, I think Martin Short would be the one of those 3 that I've been lucky enough to have on. And what's wonderful about Marty is he comes prepared with a lot of jokes, just a ton of one-liners. And it's, I think now, a far less common version of a talk show guest. And it is so much fun. It's especially fun in front of an audience because the delight and joy of Martin Short is exactly 1 out of every 3 of his jokes completely bombs. and he is hyper aware of it, and he is completely adept at saving the moment and getting the laugh on the bomb. So that is really great. For me, we have this stable now of people that have just surprised and delighted us that we get really excited about having back. Taylor Schilling is someone who is a great talk show guest. Joel Edgerton is someone we've had on a bunch of times. Timothy Oliphant, for my money, is as good of a talk show guest right now as anyone. And so it's fun to be, anytime you have a legend like Marty Short on, it's great. But it's also really fun to find those new people that the more you have on, the more comfortable you are, the more happy you are to see them.
You took part in the CNN History of Late Night documentary series that just recently ended. I watched all of those episodes. Really good, really good. Some things I didn't even know, and I've watched late night since the 70s, I guess. But where do you feel like you fit in to this history of late night?
Well, I feel like I'm in the present, so it's weird to talk about the history of it. We so live in the day here. I can tell you that I am always happy to talk to Bill Carter. And, even before I met him, I'd really enjoyed reading his books about late night. So it was nice to sit down with him. It was very strange to have the show come out so long after we sat down with him, because obviously I don't have to tell you, those were pre-pandemic interviews. Nobody was doing late night documentaries during lockdowns. But, we just kind of focus on being lucky enough to have a show right now in 2021, and we'll let other people speak to the history of it 50 years from now.
Well, I hope you don't have to go. I mean, they had practically a whole episode devoted to Dave versus Jay and Conan's, Conan versus Jay. So hopefully you don't have anything like that coming up in your future.
I feel very confident as someone who, not to date when we're doing this interview, as someone who is going to be a guest on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon tonight, I feel very confident that that is not going to happen with the two of us.
Speaking of history, late night, your franchise, you're the fourth host. Well, you know that. But the 40th anniversary is next February. Are there any thoughts about something you might do, or maybe bring on the other three, or are there thoughts about what you could do?
I mean, I will say that Conan, who I had a wonderful conversation with recently on his podcast, and I'm such a fan of, we have not had him on our show yet. And that would be joyful to make that happen, especially since we had Dave and Jimmy's been here multiple times. But it would be lovely to get that done, especially around next February.
We talked about the episodes that you're promoting on the FYC site. I really would like to see you get into that variety talk category this year. You've been getting into writing every year, I think. Well, not every year, but 4 years in a row. Critics' Choice 2 wins in a row, Writers Guild 5 nominations in a row. Make the case to a voter that's watching this why your show deserves to get into that group of 5.
Well, I mean, the only thing I'll say is I've never felt like there's been an undeserving show nominated in the years we haven't. It's a really great time for late night. And so we're never offended to be on the outside looking in. And I should stress that we take great pride in the nominations for writing. We take that part of the show probably more seriously than anything else. Basically because I have no other skills other than writing and then speaking lines that have been written. So that's been our bread and butter. But it would be nice. It would certainly be nice that unlike the writing nominations that are just for the writing staff, we have such an incredible team of producers here as well who've been doing a great job since 2014. And so the case I would make is that they very much deserve the honor of a nomination as much as the writing staff has.
Well, I keep up with all this stuff, and most shows, it's pretty rare for especially a variety show, a talk show, to get in on its first couple of tries. Most of them had to wait a little while. So I hope this is finally the year for you. What about
even if it's not, it gives us something to look forward to next year, because I feel like the first one's going to be the really exciting one, Chris. And after that, then you just got to hold on for dear life year in and year out. That sounds very stressful.
It is a category where once you get in, you're set for years. I mean, as long as you don't just have a bomb of a season, they like to just keep voting for you. So just get in, and then you can hang on for dear life for a few seasons. You mentioned the audience. Is there a date set for audience coming back?
We aren't going to consider it before September. We're going to get through the rest of the summer without an audience. We're going to take a look and see how they make it work at the Tonight Show. Obviously, we're huge beneficiaries of them being the first show that brought back audiences to see how it's working just on a logistical level. We are, enjoying our time just communicating without the sort of proxy audience, communicating with the people who are watching at home. And it has led us to some really fun discoveries. So I don't think we're in a rush necessarily to get the audience back, certainly before we're comfortable.
Well, I definitely prefer an audience, but I will say I have gotten a lot of joy over this past year of when you do a joke or you have a guest on and they make a joke and you have that 3 or 4 people laughing. There's just something funny to me about that. like you can really play to those four cameramen and the producers that are sitting there. I think that's pretty fun too.
I also want to stress that when I came back last September, I did say to them, don't laugh. I didn't want them to feel as though they had to fill in for a full audience of people or be, an audience that had been primed to laugh. So, by the way, they don't laugh all the time, but when they do, I can promise you it's genuine. And it has led to maybe one of my favorite developments this year of a thing we do every Friday morning we post online, which is called Corrections, which is this online only, where I've read pretty much, I try to read the YouTube comments and address every nitpicky correction that people leave on YouTube. And it is everything you're not supposed to do with internet comments. And it has brought me nothing but joy. And it's the one thing that our crew, even producer Mike Shoemaker, head writer Alex Bays, none of them know what I'm going to say, and it has been a delight.
I would not want to go down that road for our stuff. I read the comments and on the articles and the videos, and I just think don't engage. Just hang.
You're very. By the way, I think that you're right and I'm wrong, but at least we're managing to mine some comedy out of it.
The things that go through people's minds, I don't understand a lot of times. Where did that thought even come from?
I will say most of it comes from a kind place. Most of Corrections are, I should say, people who are enjoying trying to find fault with small details in what are otherwise pieces they enjoy.
Final question, from your SNL days to now, some of your friends in the industry are having such good, Jason Sudeikis with Ted Lasso and Keenan's new show, and Bill Hader with Barry, just so many of them. How do you feel about that when you see somebody take that next step into success?
I mean, sometimes I will just mentally make a list of all the shows, the films that have come out of that era I was at during my time at SNL. Even, Tim Robinson and Zach Cannon doing I Think You Should Leave, which I know they have a second season coming out next week, or the fact that right now Kristen Wiig and Will Forte are shooting a season of MacGruber for Peacock, on top of everything else you mentioned, or the fact that Andy Samberg is now has done more years of Brooklyn Nine-Nine than he was even at SNL. So I'm constantly taken aback by how lucky I was to work with so many talented people in my time there. And it's like somebody from your hometown doing good and being proud of them. I feel deep pride for everything that group of people does.
Well, Seth, this is always a pleasure. It's really one of the highlights of my year. I work on all of our interviews, so I don't get to host too many anymore. We've published, as of today, I think 425 interviews since April. And so obviously I can't edit and publish all those and still host. So I think you're maybe only my fifth interview to actually host, but I never want to lose this opportunity because it's so much fun. And we've got such a long streak going, I think 5 or 6 years.
I know. So. Well, I really appreciate it. And look, I think the reason you want to keep doing this is the worst thing for you would be if you let somebody else interview me and that was the year our show got nominated, because that would just reflect so badly on you, Chris.
But I could be the one holding you back.
I don't think that's the case, but
it could be saying,
you know what, at this point, I want it to happen with you or not at all. That's the way I feel.
Well, I know you'll bring your wife, but I'd kind of like to be invited along if you get into talk series. Maybe you can get a +1.
My wife cares not for awards. If it happens, you're my +1. Let's do this.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to it. We have it on video. Thank you so much, Seth. Good luck with the Emmys.
All right.